Jon is a 2003 graduate from Holy Cross who earned a degree in political science and served as President Barack Obama's head speechwriter from 2005 to 2013. But we like to think that he honed his craft while writing the valedictory address he gave at his commencement, and we were thrilled to invite him back to campus in 2014 to accept an honorary degree and deliver the commencement address. Since leaving the White House, Jon has written and spoken about politics and speechwriting to audiences throughout the world. In 2017, he co-founded Crooked Media, where he's a co-host of Pod Save America and host of Offline and the Wilderness. Jon now lives in Los Angeles with his wife, Emily, and their son, Charlie, and their dog, Leo. And our second conversationalist tonight is Vincent Rougeau, a nationally respected expert in legal education and Catholic social thought. Vince, to our great pleasure, became the 33rd president of Holy Cross in July. The college's first lay and first Black president, he previously served as dean of Boston College Law School and as the inaugural director of the Forum on Racial Justice in America. He has written extensively on law and religion and is the author of Christians in the American Empire, Faith and Citizenship in the New World Order. President Rougeau graduated magna cum laude from Brown University and earned his JD from Harvard Law School. And he and his wife, Robin Cornegay Rougeau, MD, have 3 sons. Welcome, Jon and Vince, and let's get started. Jon, the first one's for you.
Sure.
Given that I have no doubt you had many, many choices as you were thinking about where you wanted to go to school, why Holy Cross?
Oh, why Holy Cross? It was sort of a happy accident. My mother had, my mother's a teacher, and she had a teacher friend of hers whose son went to Holy Cross, and she told, I was telling the president backstage, I was originally applying to BC, and she said, you should apply to Holy Cross as well. And I said, if I get into BC, I'm going to go to BC. And then she said, just apply to Holy Cross. And I applied, and then I visited the campus, and I completely fell in love with it. And it was a weird experience walking on the campus, walking around, and visiting, and I just had this feeling that I was like, this is for me. Mm-hmm. This is what I want to do. And you know, it was the most consequential decision that I've ever made. You know.
So if I can follow up, can you talk a little bit about your own experience in the DC program and,
yes.
and what it launched for you?
Well, actually, the decision to do the Washington internship program, that was the most consequential decision. And I say that even people are probably like, well, what about meeting your wife? Well, I wouldn't have met Emily had I not done the DC internship program. So everything sort of flowed from there. But I know a lot of my friends at Holy Cross were sort of going abroad for a year, and I was having so much fun at Holy Cross and enjoying it so much. I was like, I don't want to go away for a whole year. I was a political science major, and I was also taking a lot of sociology classes as well, but I wasn't sure that I wanted a career in politics. I thought that maybe I would go to law school. That had been a plan. Maybe I'd be a journalist. But I went to an event much like this at Holy Cross where there were some alumni of the DC internship program who talked about the program, and I thought, this sounds like I should give it a whirl because I've always thought about politics and I've wondered about politics. And so I applied for the DC internship program, and so I did spring of 2002. And it was right after, applying for that semester, it was right during the anthrax scare in DC. And I had applied for a bunch of different internships, Paul Wellstone's office, Hillary Clinton's office, Ted Kennedy's office, and none of my applications actually made it there because after the anthrax scare, the mail got sort of held up. But a friend of mine, Kevin Polanski, also 2003, had interned for John Kerry in the fall, and so he had told someone in the office, oh, my friend wants to do this internship program in the spring, and so I ended up with John Kerry, again, by chance. Also by chance, I ended up as a press intern in his office, and I sat next to John Kerry's communications director and chief speechwriter at the time, his press secretary, and his political advisor, as he was planning to run for president in 2004. And those months that I spent in Senator Kerry's communications office, I was bitten by the political bug and knew at that point that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And part of the reason I believe that is, the first 2 years at Holy Cross, I did a lot of community service in Worcester, and I started a project called the Welfare Solidarity Project. And what we did is we went to the welfare office in Worcester, and we worked with some lawyers, some pro bono lawyers, who their job was to advocate for welfare recipients to make sure that they were getting the benefits they deserve. This was after welfare reform, after President Clinton had passed welfare reform, and sort of the incentive was to get people off welfare and working again. But a lot of people were being kicked off assistance who shouldn't have been kicked off assistance. And so we set up shop in that welfare office to make sure if someone wasn't getting the benefits they deserved, we could connect them with a lawyer and we could advocate for them to make sure that they were getting their benefits. And I did this for a while, and it was a real fulfilling project. But I remember sitting there one day and thinking, like, this is sort of a piecemeal solution to a much bigger problem. And the laws that are getting made that are affecting these people's lives, that are causing all of us to be sitting in this office trying to advocate for people to get benefits that they already deserve because of the law. We're all doing this because a bunch of people in Boston and Washington are making decisions and passing laws that have huge consequences for people's lives. And I feel like I need to be part of that, because that's going to be the way that we actually create real big change. And so connecting sort of the service that I was doing at Holy Cross with where these decisions were being made, which many of them were being made in Washington, D.C., really sort of brought it all together for me. And when I did the internship program, that was when I knew that I was going to be in politics, whether I liked it or not.
So Vince, I wonder if you could follow up on John's story and Emma's story and some of the other stories you've heard tonight, and talk about how you see the DC program and the other programs that we're offering at the college as part of our academic mission.
Well, I think you can, from hearing all the stories we've already heard tonight, you can see how central this is to the idea of formative education, the idea that you go into things and have an experience that can really be transformative in your life and opens up a whole new set of opportunities that you never would have considered had you not had the opportunity to do something different, to move off a normal sort of set plan and to take that step to go away, to leave the campus and immerse yourself into something new. So, I mean, on one sense, it's the idea of experiential learning, right? Experiential learning is an incredibly important part of how we learn and how we develop. And so our study abroad programs, our DC semester, our New York semester, these are all experiential learning opportunities that take us out of the classroom and put students in situations where, their mind is triggered by different things. They see things they wouldn't have seen otherwise, and they can make they see new opportunities. And they can also connect back to the things that they've learned in the classroom. So it makes a lot of that learning come to life. And so I think it's really an essential part of what we do. And frankly, I mean, the DC program really, being the opportunity to come to the nation's capital and to be a part of what happens here, and I think you heard in some of the opening remarks, there's so much more going on here than I think students could possibly imagine without being here. And, yes, it's the seat of government. Yes, it's where the Congress does its work. It's where the president is. But, the things that happen in the law and the things that happen in nonprofits and the things that are happening in international space, the things that are happening, around foundation work. I mean, there's so much going on here. And once you're here and you see it, it opens up, a whole new understanding of what could be available to a student. Mm-hmm. Not only in terms of learning, but also in terms of a career.
I'm going to switch our focus a little bit to talk about politics directly, as opposed to just the DC program. And I guess I'll start, Jon, just by saying, you had a front row seat to President Barack Obama's most memorable moments. And I guess I'm wondering, what's the wisdom that you took from that experience?
The wisdom I took from that experience. I was very, I still consider myself extremely fortunate to have been able to work for Barack Obama. I will say that one of the reasons I think that we worked so well together is because the education that I got at Holy Cross, and specifically the Jesuit education about service to others and being men and women for others, was it gave me a philosophy about politics and public service that was very closely aligned with Barack Obama's. And I remember when I first read Dreams from My Father, his first book, before I took the job, and he talked about community organizing on the south side of Chicago, and he talked about working with churches in Chicago to do community service there and to do community organizing there. It reminded me of working in Worcester. And it reminded me of the education I got at Holy Cross and the Jesuit education specifically and social justice. And so I remember when I sat down with him his first week in the Senate, and he asked me if I had it was actually the easiest interview that I've ever done, I will say, because he was very nice. He was like, where'd you grow up? What's your family like? But he was like, where'd you go to school? Tell me about your education. And I told him all about Holy Cross, and I told him all about Worcester. And he immediately sort of saw a commonality there. And, I think for the 8 years that I worked for him, what I learned is that as difficult as the circumstances may be, and as many setbacks as we may get in politics, it's always worth trying. And that if people can band together and keep working and keep fighting and keep organizing, you can actually bring about change. And I think this is part of my sort of specific role as speechwriter, democracy, which, as we've all learned over the last couple of years, is probably more fragile than we ever thought, sort of rests upon the ability for us to persuade one another. It's this idea that, look, there's 300 and something million people in this country. We don't all agree, but we're all stuck here together. And if we want democracy to work, and we want our views to prevail and our beliefs to prevail, the only way to get that done is to persuade other people to come along with us. And that job of persuasion is incredibly difficult, but it requires a lot of the characteristics and beliefs that I sort of learned at Holy Cross, which is first and foremost empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to understand where they come from and where they've been and what they may think, and then meeting them where they are, but then never leaving them there, trying to then bring them along. And in my years of working with Barack Obama and my years of working in the White House and my years in politics, that is something that I've tried to never forget, even as the political climate has become nasty and divided. And I myself, as a partisan Democrat, have at times wanted to give in to just yelling at the other side. You've probably heard me do that on the podcast. And we all do that. But at the end of the day, if we're going to make this thing work, if we're going to make this country work, if we're going to hold on to democracy, we're going to have to be able to have a conversation with people who we don't agree with. And by the way, that's another thing that I really value about the Washington internship program. There was, I think, 9 of us in my semester, and I'd say it was about half and half, sort of liberal-minded students and conservative-minded students. And we had, someone working for Senator Vitter, who was a Republican from Louisiana. Yeah, I know. And we had, we had someone at I believe at the Heritage Foundation, and Justice Thomas gave us a tour of the Supreme Court. But I remember we we all debated, all of the students. We had like real debates with each other about politics when we weren't at our internships, when we were sort of back in our apartments in Alexandria, and we would like debate late into the evening about politics. And one of the other things that I valued so much about Holy Cross is, like I said, by the end I was like a sociology and political science sort of double major, and you know, the sociology department, a little more left. The political science department, some of the political science department, a little more right.
Some.
And I very much valued the fact that I could go, partly because Holy Cross is such a small school, that like I had a great time in the classroom, but after class, I would go to a lot of my professors' office hours, and I would debate politics with them, and I would take a view from a more conservative professor and present it to a more liberal professor and go back and forth. And my education that I got at Holy Cross, and especially the experiences that I had at the DC internship program, it taught me how to argue, and it taught me how to debate, and it taught me how to do so in a way that wasn't as harsh or strident or sort of ineffective as what we see from politics today, but one that really got to the heart of the matter. And that's something that's just invaluable.
Thanks. Vince, from the time you started at Holy Cross, one of the things that you've talked a lot about, right, is the importance of educating our students to be global citizens, right? And I think that we all feel that, you know, that we're not in a great space right now in this country or in the world. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see the role of higher education and the role of Holy Cross, maybe in particular, right, in helping to move us to a better place. And you know, you're running a series now at Holy Cross called Defending Democracy. And so maybe you can reflect a little bit on what your hopes are for where we might go.
Yeah, I think, you know, Jon said so many things that resonate with me and with the work we're trying to do at the college around democracy. But I guess at the highest level, we have to think a little bit about what does higher education owe the democracy. Ron Daniels, the president of Johns Hopkins, has written a recent book on this about the relationship between higher education and democracy. And, you know, I think on some level, one might argue, he would argue, that maybe we haven't done as much as we should have done you know, across higher education sort of writ large. And, you know, our democracy is in trouble, and we have to really think carefully about what we value about living in a democratic society. And many of the things Jon just talked about, I mean, the ability to speak across difference is critical. The recognition of the fact that, you know, we share a geographic and political space that doesn't necessarily mean we all have to agree all the time, and frankly, that's impossible. But also, you know, requires a sense and ability to compromise, a recognition that you don't win every argument in a democratic society. I mean, you put your argument out there on the table, and there's a discussion, there's a bargaining, there are different ways, and ultimately, for a number of different reasons, not always necessarily because someone is right, you know, a choice has to be made. And we live with that choice because we value the concept of living together in this kind of system where every citizen has a voice, every person is valued as a citizen, and of course that connects so deeply with our values as a Jesuit Catholic institution. All people have dignity, everyone deserves to participate. And what we're seeing, I think, increasing in our political life is, well, not everyone really agrees with that. Not everyone agrees that everyone should have a right to participate. Not everyone agrees that everyone's views matter, and that, you know, maybe we should, you know, tweak the system a bit so that certain views tend to win more than other views, and that's extraordinarily dangerous. And I don't think we have to look any further than what's happening right now in Europe with Ukraine to understand just how serious this situation is. Now, I think from my perspective as a college president and as the president of Holy Cross, it is critical to me that I make sure that my students at this college understand their role as individuals who have an education and the ability to be critical thinkers, to engage information as citizens, but also as intelligent individuals who can decide for themselves what is true and what is not true. Not because they hear it in a certain place and they just accept it, because that's where it came from, a place they like, but because they know they have the tools to really dig into information and to discern whether or not it's valid, whether or not it makes sense, whether or not it's taking them to a place where they want to go, or taken to a place where they don't want to go or they shouldn't want to go. And they're also learning some of the things Jon talked about earlier, to engage across difference within the framework of dignity, within the framework of understanding that the person across the table is a person, is a human being who is coming to issues for all kinds of reasons, some of which I may not fully understand, and maybe if I engage that person a little bit more, I will get to know. Jon mentioned community organizing, and one of the things you learn in organizing is, you need to build relationships. You need to have conversations in order to understand what a community needs. And it's a community that we're talking about, right? We're not talking about what I need as an individual when we're talking about our politics, when we're talking about our life together as a society. What does this society need? How are we going to move forward together? And that may mean that there are some things that might be pretty good for me that aren't going to be good for most people. And so I have to understand whether or not there's some things I can give up in the interest of the common, in the interest of the common good. So we have at Holy Cross an intellectual tradition and a history as a Jesuit Catholic institution where that has been thought through very carefully for a very, very, very long time. And we're trying to live that out every day, and we're trying to communicate that across the generations to all of our students. So our role, I think, is critical in nurturing the skills and the talents and the sort of, the sensibilities of what it means to be a person of integrity, a person of intellect, and frankly, a person who cares about living in a democracy, because there are a lot of people who really don't. And we have a lot to lose if we don't fight that.
Yeah. Jon, I wonder if you could think about, if we have some prospective students here, we have a bunch of students who are, 17, 18, 19 years old, just started their Holy Cross career. What kind of advice would you give them as they're kind of making their way through the world and making their way through this world, right, in particular?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, I think, if you're at Holy Cross, I would say avail yourself of the wonderful opportunities that you have at a school that's giving you a liberal arts education. I'm extremely grateful for the liberal arts education I got, because it taught me, what I learned at Holy Cross was how to think. More important than any specific major or specific class. It was how to think critically. It was how to, the importance of service, and really how to connect it all. I mean, that's what's, I think, so important about the DC semester program, and at least in my experience, is that I was able to connect what I was learning in the classroom, what I was doing in the community in Worcester, and then how that connects to the wider world. And so if you're going to Holy Cross already, I would absolutely avail yourself of all the opportunities, and really, like, what I loved most, and I'm not saying this just to pander to this crowd or to suck up, but like, I think often about the professors that I had at Holy Cross as the people who were some of, just so formative for me. And I know Professor Yule is here, my favorite history professor, and so many of the professors in the political science department, so many professors in the sociology department, and the time that I spent with them and the time that I learned from them, not just in the classroom but outside the classroom, like it is why I have had a career in politics, still are interested in politics, still care about these issues, still care about defending democracy. None of that would have happened without the education that I had at Holy Cross or the professors that I had at Holy Cross. It really wouldn't. And I made, of course, lifelong friendships at Holy Cross that I have to this day, and I had fun there, but like the conversations I had with my professors at Holy Cross and the relationships I had there, which you can't get sometimes at a really big university or a big school, and it is very unique to Holy Cross. That is what I am most grateful for to this day, and it's what I still think about all the time.
Mm-hmm. So Vince, I have a similar question for you. You've been at Holy Cross now for 9 months, is that right? 9 months at Holy Cross, and so as you look at the opportunities for students and the ways in which our faculty engage students and the ways in which you've engaged faculty, what are your hopes for where we're going and what we might be able to do in the future?
Yeah, I think one of the real gifts and the beauty of the Holy Cross education is that close, intimate work of relationship building that can occur between faculty and students, amongst students, across the community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, in ways that are so transformative because it's small enough, without being tiny, to foster that kind of meaningful engagement, to allow people to, take those steps to get to know a lot of people in their classes, to get to know their professors, for the professors to get to know their students. And as someone who has taught students for 30 years, I know that knowing your students, being able to really engage with them is one of the reasons you choose to do this work. I mean, you understand what an education can offer, what it can provide. You don't come into the relationship with a student with some preconceived notion about how it's going to end, but you do come into it recognizing that they're here to take advantage of knowledge that you can convey, to an experience that you can offer, and to what may be a transformative learning experience that will carry them through for the rest of their lives. And I mean, that's very gratifying work for all of us who are academics, but it's also work that can sometimes be constrained by some of the other things that we have to do in large academic settings. And I think at Holy Cross, the balance is just right. We're mission-driven, we're small, and we have an ability to really create these transformative relationships and opportunities like this DC program. And for me, it's just, it's extremely inspiring. It's why I'm so excited to be in this role. Not only because of the relationships that I can see of students and faculty have, but also the relationships I can have with students and faculty in terms of leading an institution and taking it to new places, and building a sense of community that really carries these values forward through changing times. Because what worked, in one time isn't necessarily going to work in the future, but there's something core that we carry with us every step of the way. So I'm incredibly proud and pleased to be able to do that.
So we know what you're going to be doing for the next few years, but, but Jon, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about where you're heading.
So I am still running Crooked Media. We have about 20 podcasts now. I'm hosting 3 of them. Our goal is to, one of the things I think we're most proud of at Crooked Media is we launched Vote Save America in 2018 for the 2018 midterms, and then again in 2020. We raised something like $30 million for Democratic candidates. We had 300,000 volunteers sign up for the 2020 election. And so, being able to run a company that fuses both sort of progressive media with progressive activism and getting people to volunteer and to serve sort of allows me to continue practicing politics the way that I love to, and I get to yell about it on the microphone all the time. But we also get to do some work around the elections and try to help get people elected. So we're going to keep, we're almost 80 employees now at Crooked, and we're in Los Angeles, and we're going to try to keep growing and keep expanding. And again, like I was saying earlier about politics, our goal is to try to reach people where they are. And so we know that there's a lot of people out there who may not be news junkies or political junkies or partisan activists, but may have progressive values and may, be interested in politics, and whether that's meeting them with entertainment, television, film, movies, we want to expand to different formats and different mediums, and not just podcasts, but television and film, and we have a book imprint that we're announcing soon, and so we have a lot going on. We're pretty busy over there. So that's
Very
I'll be doing that
exciting.
for the time being.
Very exciting,
Yeah.
very exciting. And I think we're going to give you the last word, Jon, because we want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to once again mix and mingle and interact with one another. But please join me in thanking Jon and Vince for the conversation. So we purposely left time for you to go back to the bar and or mix and mingle around your tables. I encourage those of you who might be interested in hosting an intern to talk to Gary or Mary Ann or talk to John Conley about his experience. Or there are, like I said, there are others in the room who've had internship experiences as well. I really want to thank you for coming today. We are just so delighted to be in DC and to be able to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this program. It's really been extraordinary in terms of its impact on our students and its impact on the college writ large. Prospective students and families, we're happy to be able to have you here, to give you a little taste of the Holy Cross magic as you join us. And I guess as I close, I want to echo something that Vince said earlier, that even as we celebrate all of our blessings, we're at a moment where democracy needs some defending, not just here, but globally. And so we certainly pray for those in Ukraine and all those who are working hard to defend democracy across the world. So thank you all for joining us, and let the celebrating continue.
Thank you.